Today, I'm honored to speak with one of our MedCircle members, Amy Santus, who is a licensed clinical social worker and founder of True Bloom Counseling, and she specializes in reproductive trauma. I'm very excited to speak with her more today. Amy will help us learn what reproductive trauma is, why it often gets overlooked, and of course, how to heal and move forward from this loss. But first, there is a new self-care trend among Gen Z and millennials. That's me, I'm a millennial. Let's hear what mental health experts have to say about it. Is it really self-care to lay in bed all day, or as the Scottish call it, Hurkle-Durkle? Hurkle-Durkling, which means to lie in bed or lounge about when one should be up and about, has become a huge trend on TikTok and other social media platforms in the past few months. I think Hurkle-Durkling should be called Kyle Kittlesoning. I love laying in bed all day. A lot of people would argue that it's good for their mental health, but what do mental health experts have to say? Well, HuffPost interviewed several mental health experts to better understand the benefits and the drawbacks. ThriveWorks licensed clinical social worker Maria Mathis says it's anti-ethical to the hustle culture we're often inundated with that focuses on maximizing every moment of the day. However, sometimes prioritizing rest and having a slower start to the day is the best way to optimize your time and your mental health. It presents us with the opportunity to get much needed rest, move at a gentler pace, and reset to properly approach the morning. But what about the downsides? Dr. Jessica Gold, an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, had this to say. I think there's probably a limit or a time when it becomes an avoidance mechanism or sign that something else is going on. Burnout comes to mind if the thing you don't want to get up and do is go to work. Sleep is super important to mental health, and our bodies are usually telling us something when we don't want to get out of bed or want to keep sleeping. But what do you think, dear viewer? What's the right way to Hurkle-Durkle? Is there a time when it becomes problematic or masks signs of depression or other disorders? Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Now, let's welcome Amy to the show. Amy, first of all, that was probably an unexpected way for us to start our conversation. Do you have any thoughts on Hurkle-Durkling?
Hi, Kyle. It's great to be here. Yes, that's interesting. I think it's a good segue into what we're going to talk about today. I mean, the concepts around Hurkle-Durkling sound amazing, right? It's like rest, relaxation without expectation. And in the Gen Z world and millennials, like adaptation to that may be exactly what we need, right? It's like we're constantly in the struggle of go, do, perform. And if this adaptation of this concept is going to allow us the permission to rest, I think it could be amazing. Similar to what was said in the drawbacks, I think one thing that I would be cognizant of as a clinician is when it becomes dysfunctional, disruptive. Like all of a sudden, we've lost the motivation to do the things that we normally did. And now the time that we'd spent turns into lack of motivation to get out of the Hurkle-Durkle, right? And that can mimic some other things. That can mimic things like depression and anxiety. It can start to represent like avoidance strategies.
Okay, tell us a little bit about yourself, Amy, and how you got into the mental health space.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Michigan, and I specialize in infertility and pregnancy loss. It has been through my own journey that I have kind of taken this pain and turned it into purpose. And I started this journey of how do I come to understand best how to heal others who are going through this sort of loss, in some ways, trauma. And that's kind of what brought me here.
hmm And so, explain to our viewers who may be hearing the term or phrase reproductive trauma for the first time. What are we talking about?
Yes, it's a great question. I think when people hear this, idea of trauma comes up. What is trauma? And it can be defined in a lot of different ways. Um, Generally speaking, trauma is defined as any sort of event or feeling that goes beyond our ability to cope, beyond the human experience, right? Where we feel so overwhelmed that we don't have the capacity to see through the other side. With reproductive trauma, that can look like pregnancy loss, that can look like years of infertility, that can look like postpartum depression, and it can look like anxiety around one's ability to have a child.
So, I have a friend, a dear, dear friend, and her husband for years tried to have a baby and went through, I think, 3 rounds of IVF. And the emotional toll. that it took on their family was significant. And they were never successful. And they have now come to the reality that a child, birthed by them is going to be unlikely or, downright not going to happen.
Mhm.
Is that part of reproductive trauma?
Absolutely.
Got it.
What you describe, Kyle, is what I see every day in my practice. The thing that we end up, if someone hasn't gone through it or been really close to someone who's experienced this sort of reproductive trauma, is that it engulfs so much more than it looks like, right? It encompasses financial burden, right? IVF is not cheap. It is a part of our identity. We have this identity of what it would be like to be a parent. And when we can't become that, what does it say about who we are and what our dreams are? It encompasses marital discourse, right? We start to argue with our spouse. Maybe they're grieving or acting in a different way when we don't become pregnant or when we have a loss. It impacts the way we see the world. People are getting triggered. You can't go to a Target and not see someone pregnant. You can't walk into a building or go to work without seeing a pregnant person, right? And these are the sort of aspects that I see every day. It encompasses all of our being. When people, when they engage in cultural practices, a lot of times it's about the family expectation. A lot of them are centered around children and maybe a lot of children or having children. And it kind of can transcend across all of, where we show up in our lives.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I like that you bring up the financial spot because we, nobody is talking enough or giving enough actionable insight to the mental health impacts of financial stress. When somebody is in that financial space or financial burden, spending a ton of money on therapy, especially if insurance can't cover it, doesn't even become an option. What would you recommend outside of therapy for somebody who is trying to really address and move through this reproductive trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question again. There are resources out there, and you're right. IVF, the average round, uncomplicated round of IVF is $20,000. That's not a realistic thing for a lot of people. And I think, is there insurance coverage? There can be. I'm starting to see it more, but it's not there. It's just not across the board. When it comes to where do they seek help, there are resources out there that can be low cost or free. One of the great resources that I'd like to refer people to is Resolve. Resolve is the National Infertility Support Center. It involves free support groups for anybody in the journey. It could be single parents or single individuals looking to become parents. It could be primary or secondary infertility. It could be same-sex couples going through the nuances of becoming and trying to become parents.
And I know for my friend, her support system was incredibly significant in her going through these rounds of IVF and the failure after failure of IVF. If that's even the right term to call it, maybe I shouldn't call it failure, but the attempt at least. And one thing that really stuck out to me is she had a friend who was well intentioned, well meaning, okay, a very good friend. But my friend had had 3 rounds of IVF, and her friend sent her like a book on, tracking your cycle and like, maybe some food to eat that helps. I don't even know the specifics of the book. But my friend who's been dealing with all this reproductive trauma is like, honey, we're way past that. Like, don't you think I've tried these things? And so I think there is, although it was well intended from the friend, our responsibility of people who are supporting those going through these trauma is to get a little more educated on what's going on and lend that support accordingly.
I love that you mentioned that because those are the things I hear. The comments that they are well intended,
Mhm.
but they're not validating.
Mhm.
They're not validating of the experience, right? So some of the ones that I often hear is, don't worry, you'll get pregnant again. Or, well, at least you can get pregnant. It may be, well, this happened for a reason.
Oof.
And then the best, that I often hear is just relax, it'll happen, right? So again, it's not ill will by our loved ones. It's really not. But all of these statements are invalidating. They're invalidating of the loss. What they're essentially saying is, get over it, move on. This shouldn't have this impact, right? So part of the education that I provide my clients is advocating for what they need, telling others. We have to sometimes tell them what we need, especially if they're part of our support system.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. MedCircle is releasing a new product called MedCircle Courses. These courses are a 6-step process in order to help you move through some of life's biggest crises, divorce, grief, parenting a teen through addiction, all of those big ones. And so if you're watching this and you're not on MedCircle's email list, it's of course free to join our list. That is where we will be publishing the first course that we're coming out with and subsequent courses. So make sure you visit medcircle.com and sign up to be on our email list to get access to those courses. Now, I'm also really thankful to have you here, Amy, because you are not just working in the field, but you're also a MedCircle member. And I would love to know how you utilize or leverage your MedCircle membership to help you personally or help you professionally, or perhaps it's both.
It's both, Kyle. It is. First of all, I just love logging on. Your sense of humor and what you bring to it is awesome. And the way that you guys have found such incredible experts in all of these fields is so cool. It's so easy. I log on, it's on my phone, I'm driving to work, I'm listening. MedCircle has been instrumental in growing my knowledge as a clinician. The expert advice, the practical tools can be easily applied in my practice.
Yeah.
And the thing I really like too is allowing my clients to go to it. I'll say, hey, I want you to check out this video. This is something that I think will help understand what we talked about today in session. Or these people are the experts. I want you to listen to this because they do a phenomenal job. So it really has been a great tool.
I agree. I don't just work here. I am a user myself, and I am often listening to myself. Again, I don't like listening to myself. I don't know many people who do, but I'm like, okay, that doctor I talked to 4 years ago, she was right. I got to remember that, because I had forgotten. So I'm with you on that. Well, thank you for being a member. And I'm very excited for you and the rest of our members to see over the next 6 weeks. We are bringing a brand new, a more upgraded, a more robust MedCircle offering with an upgraded app, new videos, new workshops, new products, new office hours, more doctors, more video series. It's just a very exciting and busy time here. And it's people like you that make this possible. So Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you. I look forward to that. I can't wait.
Awesome. Now, before you go, I would love a story, a sentiment, a motto, or a word for those who are listening to this, who are in the middle of the battle. They're in the middle of it. They can't even see the other side, and they're dealing with some sort of reproductive issue or obstacle. What do you have for them?
Yeah, that's a great one. The one thing that I always try to go back to is when you have this dream of becoming a parent and it is interrupted, your story is interrupted. I come back to, this is not where your dream of parenting has to end. We reiterate that, use that as our mantra. What the story looks like, the second version of our story, what it looks like, I'm not sure. But when we fall into the depths of despair and all of the emotions around that, we go back to, my story of parenthood doesn't have to end here.
Wonderful, wonderful. That is a great message. And thank you for sharing that. And thank you for all the work that you do, Amy. How fantastic. Where can people learn more about you or get in contact with you?
Sure. Well, my practice is called True Bloom Counseling, and I'm in Michigan. So I have a website. You can contact me there. It has all my information. Even if you want resources, I've done a lot of work in the last several years for teaching other clinicians. I've guided other clinicians through reproductive trauma and how to provide therapy. But reach out to me. My contact's in there. Say, hey, Amy, I need some resources, or I'd like some more information. I'd be happy to respond.
Fabulous. We'll include a link to Amy's website in the description of this video. And Amy, thank you for your time today and, of course, your insight.
All right. Thank you, Kyle.
Now, if you are looking for more information right now on the topic of reproductive trauma, I can't recommend our series on the topic featuring reproductive psychiatrist, Dr. Sarah Orrick. Dr. Orrick and I sat down to discuss the ins and outs of what people can expect and what tools are at their disposal when going through some of these challenges. And here's a sneak peek into that series. Take a look.
So anxiety comes up, and for a lot of people with depression, even outside of perinatal mood and anxiety issues, depression and anxiety sometimes come together. So that's something, if there's past trauma, that can sometimes come up, something not talked about as much as traumatic births. People really have a lot of expectations around what birth might be, and when it doesn't go their way or things are traumatic, this is often the first time women are in surgery or in any kind of medical setting or staying overnight at a hospital. That can really be impactful and can actually increase the risk of postpartum depression, especially if it's not processed. So if things really went haywire, you had a hemorrhage and really no one has addressed it, it's something that we're concerned about.
What can they do? What are some good questions to ask? What is the proper way to approach this person that you love to show up and be there for them?
So I love the first part of just, how are you? Right? I know the baby's doing fine, but how are you doing? How can I be more helpful? Do you need more sleep? Are you getting enough sleep? Sort of checking in with those and asking about mood. How are you feeling? You've been through a lot.
Again, you can watch that entire series on postpartum depression using the links below this video. I also wanted to share a series featuring clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani on the topic of trauma. Take a look at a part of this series.
Trauma is something that's not just psychologically coded, it's also very physiologically held. People carry it in their bodies, and when they're triggered or reminded of trauma, they'll often report physiological pain, sometimes related to the trauma, sometimes not. But I have to say, working with many clients who have histories of trauma, how much of that's carried somatically. So no matter how much of the work we do here, there's still, it's like a memory, that's kept here.
That series and more than 900 other mental health videos are available to MedCircle members at medcircle.com. Thank you for watching this video. We'll see you on the next one. Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this.